All right, welcome everyone to our planning object kickoff for engineering. We've been iterating in design for about 4 weeks on this. So it's exciting to have the engineering team get involved and we can start thinking through some of the tough questions around planning objects and where we go with this feature in general. I wanted to just start and quickly give a high level on the meeting format and just sort of how it will go. The first section, 10 to 15 minutes, will be a combo of each PM sharing their vision and kind of their investment in this and where this is going. And then we'll have Holly summarize the learnings from what they've learned in the design phase so far and where we want to go. And then the biggest chunk of it will be for everyone to think through deep thinking on what we actually need to do to make these MVCs happen. So I can start in terms of investment. So the product planning team, I'll just speak to mine first, and Gabe and Mark can also talk, but we recently pushed back our category maturity on all of our features by 6 months. So we've opened up a 6-month window where we can devote all of our capacity to figuring out this problem. So we're really excited about that. That will open up epics for us in a lot of different places throughout GitLab. And I'll get more late into the vision later, but that's sort of the investment we've made on the product planning side.
Pretty much the same for project management. So we're kind of putting most new feature development on hold until we can refactor some of the stuff. And I can kind of talk a little bit why I feel strongly about that. But I also welcome dissenting opinions during this call. If I'm making assumptions as a product manager that aren't correct from an engineering standpoint, call me out, please. So just throw that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, to summarize what Gabe and Kristen said, I think the requirements or the certified roadmap has pretty much aligned with the next 6 months being having the need for linking between things, and the best way to get there is to develop requirements as an issue type and then work on some of these details as we move forward. So I think we're in the same boat for certify. We're really looking forward to being able to have a common issue type that we can then utilize in different ways. And I think that's where we're going to open up a lot of the possibilities as a certified group. So we're very heavily invested as well.
Nice. Okay. Let's jump into the vision section. Gabe, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Let me share my screen real quick. So I'm going to make it smaller. I just switched over to using Safari instead of Chrome, so I'm still getting used to it. I kind of diagram this out just so I can talk through it easily, but this is sort of like a product manager trying to approach some of these problems that we have, like a business owner. Well, I would call them opportunities, not problems. So we call it a CloudJect or just planning object. Is what we renamed it because CloudJect is hard to say, but planning object redesign or refactor party. I've kind of been talking about it for a while, and I wanted to start in 14.1. Starting with the basic refactor, I think we all know that there's lots of different underlying technologies that we're using both on the front end and the back end to a certain degree, different APIs. Some stuff's in Vue, some stuff's in HAML, some stuff's in Vue Apollo, some stuff's using REST API, some stuff's using GraphQL. And all of this makes changing harder, and it makes it more complex, and it also makes it's a larger mental model and cognitive load that we sort of all have to carry as we work on improving the customer experience and the value we deliver to our customers and the wider community. I think when it comes down to why refactor and why now, there's a couple different things. Improving code quality is really important. I think if we improve code quality across the board, because a lot of stuff in plan is legacy. It has been around. It's one of the oldest stages in the product. So it's not surprising. And when I talk about technical debt, it's not a bad thing. It's just it's a trade-off. It's a decision that we've all made as we've kind of decided to ship customer value, speed over kind of completeness, some of those different things. And it's really just I think we've accrued a lot of it through various decisions that I've made, that we've all made. But I think it's really important to improve code quality. When we do that, we're also increasing global productivity across the board for future changes, which also decreases the time to value for customers. It also reduces defects. I think we have an opportunity to improve performance as well, setting the proper foundation for enabling things in our product to be real time, especially within the plan stage and our span of control. There's also like numerous, like I could probably list 100 bugs that exist because of small things like real-time race conditions, somebody picking a label and then it not showing, or basically applying quick action and not seeing that it shows up in the sidebar. And then really we want to reduce the future cost of change. And so like all this stuff kind of goes down to, in the long run, it will improve SUS, like making things real time and fixing some of these like sort of transient bugs is one of the big pain points that we've heard from our user base when it comes to system usability. Every 1 point in system usability equals more or less 5% growth in ARR. There's a research study that kind of backs this up that I can link to if you're interested. But it also, we want to reduce future spend. So instead of us spending time and our kind of like, time is all we have, instead of spending it on fixing defects and these other things, which we're always going to have bugs, but like I want to spend it improving customer value. So I think refactoring is really important to get everything under this single tech stack as quickly as possible. Another part, a kind of goal for the vision, is being able to interact with like a planning object. And I call a planning object, you can think about a requirement or an epic right now, or an issue or a test case, or anything that's in plan that's like a thing that you comment on or that tracks work or tracks something. Is we want to be able to interact with it from anywhere in the product. Like everyone has label fatigue, and it's real, tab fatigue and label fatigue. But basically I have to open up like 100 tabs a day just to work in GitLab. And part of that is because we basically can't open up the issue view on the board. We can't open it up within the to-dos view. We can't, look at it from different places, and you always have to open up a tab to go look at the issue and then remember to close the tab. And then before you know it, you have it done. So really we want to make it so that you can interact with the planning object from anywhere in the product. I think that will also increase global productivity, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in the company, because everyone in the company uses planning objects to manage and facilitate their work. So that also will, if we increase productivity, it will decrease time to value for customers, so on and so forth. It's like a big system. And then kind of getting into this single like planning object hierarchy and types. One of the things that I've seen a lot of is duplication. And it's just like, it's natural as we MVC our way towards things. We sort of we realize we need something at the epic level that already exists at the issue level, but then we forget to do certain things like tying into the activity feed or showing up on your contribution graph, or like little tiny things. But I think we can really reduce the amount of duplication, which also reduces the total lifetime cost of the product surface area. So for managing less surface area, basically, like and can achieve the same solution with a single object hierarchy, it will make it easier to maintain over the total lifetime of the product. I think it will also improve usability quite a bit, because like you have to switch between groups and projects with epics and issues, and like it's all over the place. And it will also make metrics and reporting easier. So for example, the optimized group is building value stream analytics, and it only reports on issues and merge requests. Well, what if we wanted to report on epics? Well, they're going to have to do a bunch of work now to tie into that object. And so by having a single object, it also makes integrating and other stages in our product a lot easier. And then really getting into like kind of, we talked about extensible issues, but like once we get there, it sort of unlocks the power of building automation as a first class thing in the product workflows. And we talked about custom fields, but I'm thinking more like custom data objects. And the reason why is like, if you look at sort of some of the broader markets out there, and I'll kind of hop over here right quick, and what GitLab's sort of big, hairy, audacious goal is, it's to become the most popular collaboration tool for knowledge workers. And for like right now, we're starting with DevOps, but it's really the most popular collaboration tool for knowledge workers in any industry. Right. And there's lots of examples where we're using, our knowledge workers at our company are using a ton of different tools to manage their knowledge work. Whether that's Google Docs, we're rolling out a new tool for OKR tracking. We're using Gainsight to manage customer relationships. ProServe uses a different tool for budgeting and managing projects. And if you look at sort of the jobs we've done across all these different kind of knowledge workers, there's some common threads. But really, like if you look at it, developers worldwide by 2023 is 27.7 million. Knowledge workers by 2023 is going to be 1.14 billion. So there's 41 knowledge workers for every one software developer. And then looking at some adjacent markets, like the collaboration software market's a $31.5 billion market. Business process automation is 19.6, information technology service management is 12.1, and then outside of DevOps, like project and portfolio management is 4.4 billion. So like how can we build a product in a way that makes it easier to extend into these like adjacent markets down the road? And that really kind of goes down to building the right foundation. And I think this is part of that foundation. So this is going to definitely in the future drive our monthly active users. It's going to drive ARR growth, and then that will enable us to more efficiently realize basically our big, hairy, audacious goal down the road, and then also net ARR and profitability, which then will drive shareholder value. So big picture system of like why this like single foundation I think is an important element to get us there. Done.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to talk through just 3 examples. These build on what Gabe already said. They aren't different from it. I'm just kind of giving some of the high level examples that I'm really excited about for product planning and this initiative. So the first one I've linked to the whimsical there. I'm just going to share my screen. Would be, as mentioned, that we end up having issues and different types of objects rendering on our main views. So like here, I've got these purple items representing issues, but we could see potentially requirements or any other customer defined issue on roadmaps. The same goes for boards. I didn't mock anything up, but you could see a world where we could have any type of object type rendering on boards and list view as well. The second one is, and I define kind of as a parenting requirement for MVC, is to support these structures that we currently have live. So the default was just epics with issues below it, and then also the sub epics for those who are in Ultimate, so that we have 7 levels of epics and then an issue. So we really need to think through parenting structure, multi-tree, but also how do we handle multiple layers of parenting. But what's exciting about this is if we can set these up as templates, eventually we could expose these to the customers, and the customer could define the structure that they want. So they might want to go from an initiative to an epic to a story to a task object and have all of these relate and also render in all of the views, or any custom template that they wanted to create. And I think that's really exciting and flexible for knowledge workers as well, because they'll be able to define very simple ways to structure their objects, as well as very intense ones if they want to. And then the last thing that I wanted to just mention, and I'm going to use an example from Notion from this, but I think we have the opportunity, and we've been looking at this in design, but to be able to look at how we look at an object within. So like if this was an example issue here, being able to open it and not lose context. I'm still on my dashboard. I can open it, whether it's in a sidebar or a modal, and then being able to easily go in, it's in this project, right? So being able to go in and view in context, oh, I just went up a level, and now my back button lets me go right back to that issue, and one more back, and I'm back on where I was. So I think that we can explore a lot in terms of this front end refactor and how like easy it is to use these objects. So those are the things that I'm most excited about for product planning.
Awesome. I guess I'm the only one who didn't do a pretty picture, so we're just going to go verbal here. From day one, from requirements, the intention was always to be able to link multiple levels of requirements. Was to have like group level requirements be like system requirements. Then you'd have projects underneath that be like your software requirements, your firmware requirements, your hardware requirements. I mean, this has been validated time and time again, and pretty much every customer call, one of the first things they ask is, how do I have parent requirements? So going into requirements, we had always kind of, at least I hopefully always made it clear that was the intention. So we were going to try to figure out how to do that using issues and sort of like the related issue concept, but we were going to sort of port it over to the requirements object. And as this opportunity came up, it was really exciting because now if we go down this road alongside of these issue types and this collaborative, object idea and convert requirements, not only does it give the benefit that we need for the requirements, but it also makes requirements linkable to things that we didn't originally plan on linking them to. Like we can link a requirement to an issue or an epic very easily now, not just requirement to requirement linking. And that was something we had actually pushed on the roadmap far down the road because we knew it was yet another difficult integration. And this actually enables a lot of that. So from a certified perspective, from test case management, it's being able to link test cases to requirements, requirements to issues or epics, requirements to milestones. We can explore the possibilities. And again, I don't know if all of those make sense, but I think that's the joy of this is it gives us that opportunity to really look at how those requirements can be a central theme for industries where they're required. And really they can do requirement-based design, requirement-based test, which is the golden standard when you're looking at a regulated industry, is everything's based on the requirements. So this is a fantastic opportunity. I was really excited when this came along, and to see everybody else get on board too. I really see the vision that Gabe and Kristen have both presented, and I really appreciate that from the planning side. And it just goes to further what we can do and certify. So it's really exciting for me. So sorry for the lack of diagram, but yes, very much on board, very much aligns with our roadmap. And I think this is an awesome opportunity for everyone. I think Holly, you're up.
All right. So I'll just kind of quickly touch on some of what we were striving to accomplish with this research, and then I'll show some visuals as well. But I don't want to alarm anyone because we were looking to go kind of big initially with our thinking. So there are a lot of things in the designs that I'll show here in a moment that are not proposals. They're just things that we were kind of exploring. I do want to note that after talking with the team yesterday, we are not going to do any new features, it sounds like, for MVC. We're just going to look at ways that we can kind of make the experience a bit more efficient currently, and then look at new things further down the line. So some of the how might we statements we had for this research included understanding more easily what's changed or new since the user last interacted with the planning object, ways that we could capture decisions in threaded discussions and kind of setting those things as a source of truth, and then reducing context switching between discussions and the title, as well as between planning objects themselves. So let me just quickly share some of that. And I shared the link in the agenda too, but it might look a bit messy. And again, that's partly because it was just exploratory work. Can you all see my screen? And I'll zoom in, of course. Awesome, thank you. So some of the things that we had started with were, as Gabe had mentioned, we were looking at ways to provide users with the ability to access an issue from anywhere in the product. And I started by evaluating all of the different places that you can access an issue. And I do still think there's opportunity to maybe provide some adjustments down the line in terms of what you see in an issue when you access it from one place versus another, just because there are certain things that I think are going to provide more value than not in certain contexts. But I started with the to-do list as just kind of a place to analyze what that might look like. And let me just, well, yeah, I'll just quickly show the, so the work that we were exploring for this is maybe having the issue open in a panel. And this is kind of a simplified view of the issue. Something else that we are exploring is opening it in a modal instead of in a side panel. And that's one of the things that I'm creating a prototype for, so we can test on usertesting.com and get some feedback as to which experience is going to make the most sense. But again, the thought was, in this case, you select maybe one of your to-dos and a panel comes out from the right, and perhaps it has, you know, we had explored this sort of action bar feature at the top that lets you access maybe your assignees and labels and things like that from this single location, as well as see the title and description and threaded comments. But some of this, again, was more exploratory, like this layout for the actual threaded conversations. We're not going to be pursuing that necessarily for MVC, but that could be something that we could look into in the future as ways to reduce some of that clutter. We were also looking to use progressive disclosure. So how can we maybe kind of hide some things from the initial view until the user needs it, and then give them access to it at the right time? And that's also some of the work that we were exploring here. So you can see a lot of this is kind of messy, but when you click on this, it kind of just, when you click on maybe the emoji here at the top, it would, pull out this panel that shows the emojis, and you could work with those, and same with labels. So again, exploratory work, and I'm just kind of quickly going through it because I don't want anyone to think that this is proposal. We had also, again, explored ways to maybe show that something has changed since the user visited last. So you'll see some of those kind of alerts posted in here. Another approach that I had explored was maybe going with this sort of icon set up at the top. And when you click on that, it pulls up the activity feed, and you can kind of see everything that's happened with that particular issue. And some of the exploration surrounding that was maybe having the most recent things highlighted so that you can kind of quickly gauge, what has changed recently versus what was maybe a bit older. Let me see if there's anything else worth quickly touching on. I still need to do some exploration surrounding the mobile, but then also had looked at maybe some ways to further show or better surface the relationships with dependencies and child elements. So Kristen had talked about kind of that child aspect that we're looking to introduce into this, and that's something that I think is still being explored. So not a lot of that particular type of aspect here, but just to kind of show maybe some of the initial high-level designs. So just to quickly summarize, we are exploring the modal versus sidebar view for usertesting.com and hoping to get some feedback as to which approach is going to be better there. We are still kind of evaluating some ways that we can take the existing issue layout and reduce some of that visual clutter through using progressive disclosure. We also wanted to reduce the scrolling required. So this view here is kind of showing maybe the larger issue view when you select from a side panel or from a modal to go to maybe the full issue view. We'll still have that view, but how can we reduce some of the back and forth required between reviewing the conversation and then having to go back up and see the description. We have the sticky title, obviously, so that stays with you, but how can we further simplify this experience by having maybe title and description on one side and then the comments and conversation on the right side? Something else I really love the thought of is maybe providing kind of a center bar here that you can kind of drag left and right so that you can either reduce or expand the particular part of the page that you want to have more focus on. And yeah, so that's essentially, I think, everything that I wanted to touch on today. Is there anything visually that I'm missing, Gabe or Kristen, that might be valuable to quickly run over?
No, not right now, but I was just going to add a clarifying point that when we say like no net new features, it doesn't mean that we can't make significant changes to the UI UX. So like,
right,
we can make the issue or the planning object view whatever we need to do for the optimum user experience. I think when we say like no net new features, we're saying we're not going to go like keep building iterations, in the middle of this, or go build a new widget that is some new data point to add to the object model. So I do think we should continue to keep an open mind about how to improve the user experience, especially if we're going to be refactoring things in the front end. It's a great opportunity to do that. So just wanted to like that distinction clear.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. We had also explored inline editing too. So, being able to click on the title and just edit it in place, and click on the description and edit it in place without necessarily having to go into kind of this bigger WYSIWYG view. But I think there's separate discussion going on now with a different group regarding best ways to edit that kind of thing. So again, that's kind of the type of thing that I meant by new features. So thank you, Gabe, for clarifying. Any questions about anything that I've shown here? I am creating, please go ahead.
I don't know who was talking also, but go ahead, whoever it was.
Yeah, sorry, it was me. I was writing in the doc anyway, but yeah, first of all, they look really, really fresh and really cool. And I really like that they give exactly the information I would want in that modal or sidebar, like the information that kind of is just enough, right? Like, so if I see the avatar of people I work with, regularly as the assignees, that's enough for me to know who's assigned. I don't necessarily need to go in and see a tooltip, but if I need more information, I'll go in and so on. So I just think it's, first of all, like these are like look like fantastic proposals to me as just a backend person, like, but what I know. But I was wondering, like, I noticed the designs are called things like collabject. So they're obviously intended for, for every, to be as permissive as possible in terms of like, it could be an epic or an issue or whatever. So how do we distinguish them? Like, to look at this, I can tell by the fact that, the issue icon in the sidebar is highlighted that this is an issue, but at first glance, and I'm thinking about other software products, like I would know immediately whether it was an issue, an epic, or some custom issue type that I've created. So how will we distinguish it?
We have explored use of icons, and I think we do actually have now separate icons defined for various issue types. Issue types, of course, is still kind of separate work that's going on in terms of being able to identify something as a bug or as a feature or something else. But I think that just simply having an icon and then potentially, so let's look at the initial issue types that we're going out the door with would be still issue, epic, and incident. And so in that case, I would expect that we would still have kind of a similar experience to what we have. I mean, you would still have the, and actually, that's a great question as far as breadcrumbs, because I think that one of the ways that people differentiate between those is breadcrumbs, and that you can see the ID of the element at the top. So that's a great question, John. I know, again, we've talked about icons, but I think there are better ways to surface it beyond just using an icon. Someone had proposed some time ago, and I really love this idea of actually prefacing, the ID with something that's relative to either an issue or an epic or something like that, using initials, which I think some of our competitors do, but that would be a larger change. So I would say to start simply, probably iconography, and then maybe a label associated with that potentially. And when I say label, I don't mean labels in terms of our GitLab labels, but some sort of text associated with it.
Cool. Yeah, we can get to
like a topic we could dive in on, but that's a great point to highlight, John, that I think we need to have on the docket.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, like, we can get to it later, but we're going to have to solve the ID problem anyway. And we already use, as we mentioned yesterday, like REQ for requirement. If I saw an icon, a color, and an ID that was prefaced with that, 3-letter abbreviation, I think that would be more than enough, in my opinion.
I also want to clarify too. We might for multi-level epics, we're going to have some sort of, like, even if it's hard coded for initial launch, a work item hierarchy template that has different names for the different levels, probably, right? I would think, unless we want to call everything sub epic. So we'll have to solve for that like immediately. So however we want to do that from UX standpoint, I don't have strong opinions, but
I think we're a little over on the PM design side. I want to just be cognizant of time as well, that we get into the engineering questions. And we will wrap this up at the 25 past the hour.
Do we want to move on to engineering then?
I think you should raise your point though, Donald, and then we can move on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of engineering kind of depends on the answer to that anyway. But so as far as your designs, is the idea that and yeah, also designs look great, but is the idea that the design is kind of the base planning object there? So every other planning object that inherits or extends off of the base planning object is going to have what are in your designs now? And to further that question, have we started thinking of how to add widgets for other planning objects like epics or requirements, or how are those going to look in relation to what your design show?
I'd love to hear the PM's thoughts on this too, but we had explored the core elements associated with a planning object and determined that those would likely be title and description, potentially discussion as well. Those are the things that are kind of consistent across all of them. So it's possible that we would start with something just very basic like that as kind of that core object. And then depending on the type that's selected in the future, we can, you know, show certain elements that are associated with it. And that kind of goes into the extensible widgets stuff that we've been talking about for a while as well, being able to have kind of a custom UI associated with each of these types. But I would say the core pieces are title, description, and probably the discussion aspect.
I'd go a step further and say just a title, because in the future you could use it for like a wiki page or like anything, and it might have a description, it might not. But I think it's a title, like that's a title and a type, basically, or like the two things, I would think. But that's just me.
I'm on board with just title as the minimum. Then you could add to a roadmap and just have a title and render a bar. I also just linked to that spreadsheet that lists all of the different fields that we currently support by object.
Okay, so just to clarify then, because I think there has still been some discussion around things extending off of an issue, and an issue being the core type. In reality, a planning object is going to be the base type, and then an issue is going to extend off of that base planning object. Are we all on the same page there?
Yes, but I think the issue will eventually not be called, like, there won't just be an issue. So when we're doing issue types right now, we're launching with the default type of issue called issue, right? But we're also having features and other things like that. And over time, I think whatever we call it in the back end, like we can use the issue data model if we want, or however we want to do it. But everything will extend off of one common object model, whatever engineering, like however engineering wants to approach it. And it doesn't matter if it's called an issue like in the API, but in the UI, it could be called lots of other things, right? And I think that's how a lot of these other products handle it, is like you have a base data type, but then how it's presented to the end user and the user interface is sort of like varied, if that makes sense.
Cool. We want to move on. And,
one question
John.
on backend side. We extend currently as Gabe said, we extend issue model, but this is far from the basic ID and title. It contains a bunch of attributes. Do we plan to take this out of the issue table into some extensible widgets in future, or do we plan to keep this on issue table model and just keep hiding these attributes for selective issue types, as we do, for example, for test cases?
I think one of the things that's interesting, especially if you, I'll try to find it, the way that Notion does their data model is they let you transform like their widgets into lots of different types of things, but they don't mutate the data. So if like you need a certain piece of data that like for a requirement that doesn't exist on another type of issue, and you want to convert the requirement to another type of issue, you leave the data there. So that way, if you want to go back to it being a requirement, you still have the data that you originally put in. So I think it's sort of like having one object and then all the attributes are possible, but then letting the user decide which attributes they want to use on specific types of issues and letting it be configurable. But that way, when you switch between one or the other, we're not like deleting a bunch of stuff. Like whether we store it in one table or not, that's an implementation decision. But I also think that we want to make it so that you can switch between types easily without like losing a ton of information. If that helps.
I'll just add to, like, in terms of scoping this, like for this MVC, consider what we need to do to get epics onto the new planning object, and in terms of what you're hiding and showing to the end user. It should feel kind of the same using an epic when we go live for this. But under the hood, yes, every field should be available, whether we expose them or not right now.
Cool. Thanks for clarification. I wasn't aware of this feature before.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we should still keep talking the actual implementation of that though, because that kind of is my first question there. Like, are we going to keep the issue or issuables table, or are we planning on having a completely new table and then eventually migrating current issues over to this new data object?
So my first thought on backend side, it would make sense to keep the issues table existing, because migrating out of it would cause additional issues with broken ID references or EID references. And I'm not sure if there would be any extra benefit of trying to migrate to a new table from the issues table.
Yeah,
Okay.
likewise, and even moving things off that table into separate objects or separate tables would even cause more work, right? Like if because we filter by those things, so if we say that we're going to move everything off and just have a table with associated other tables, like we have to rewrite all our queries. So it just seems to make more sense to retain the existing issues table since it's the largest anyway.
Okay. Does that affect the migration plan at all, or like the rollout of this? And do we have to consider that at all?
Do you mean the plan to eventually migrate data from, like, say, the epics table to the issues table? Is that it?
Kind of. So like if we continue using issuables, like we can't give users the option of like slowly upgrading to this new issuables or this new planning object format. It's either all or nothing, right? Like everyone needs to be upgraded at the same time, essentially. Does that matter?
From their perspective in the first iteration, no, because I mean, if it shouldn't, there should be no change for them in experience, really, like between having epics as its own thing and having epics as part of the issues table in the first iteration anyway. Strongly suspect that once we start the work and we realize we get some stuff for free, that it will be hard to say no. So if you can have assignees on epics, and that's something we've wanted for a long time, and it is actually more work to restrict that than to simply support it in future, then to me it would make more sense to just do that. But from the user's perspective, like the first thing we'll migrate is requirements, and we wouldn't expect that there would be a large migration involved in that for any self-hosting customer. So I think the most challenging technical part of that is aligning the two objects so that they're as similar as possible, so the migration is not too risky.
If it's, I don't know how to approach it, but I think the migration is one aspect of it. But then I think it's also building things in a way that we realize that there, in a future state or scenario, we will allow the users to pick and choose which fields they want on which types of issues, if that makes sense. And I can show an example if that's helpful, but it's sort of like we'll ship with defaults, of course, for everything, but you may or may not see the assignee on a type of issue. It's sort of like an extension that you can add to the experience. So it's part of the core data model, but it may or may not be used by the end user, if that makes sense. And I think that's sort of like the goal with each of these types of things, like letting the user decide, hey, are we going to use estimation or not? If not, we might not show the weight field, right? Or things like that. But it's still part of the core data model. It's just it's going to be more like optional theoretically in the long run.
Okay.
For migration of requirements, we just map because requirements attributes are subset of issues. Basically, we just map them to issues attributes, and we just hide any additional attributes which are not visible for requirements. And this is not customizable by users. It's just in the code. Yeah, we don't consider this option for the first iteration that users would customize attributes on issue types, specifically on requirements, if we are talking about migration of requirements.
Okay.
But I don't think, I think it's only custom issue types where we would allow the user to add or remove widgets anyway, right? For types that we define, like test cases or requirements, we set, we define what widgets those have, right?
Maybe, but there's also a place where we will ship with defaults. Like maybe instead of like hard coding that it has to have this thing, there's certain things that a requirement might have to have, like, test reports or whatever. But there are certain things like incidents is a good example where there's some, like they hit a bunch of fields like iterations and milestones on the incident view. And then like a bunch of customers like, hey, we want to be able to assign incidents to iterations and milestones. And there's other customers that don't, right? So it's sort of like there might be core things that we are like system defaults, but there's also giving the power to the end user to use the certain fields that they may or may not want, or hide the things that they don't want, so it's not as noisy. I think that's sort of the end goal.
Do you expect this to be part of the on top of priority list or some later iteration? I mean, allow customers to customize this list of widgets or extensible features?
Much later. So like that's where for MVC, it's sort of like what we're doing with issue types right now is where we have some default issue types and we have icons for them, and we're going to ship with just the default issue types. But the way that Brett was working on the data model and putting stuff into its own table is so that the end user can eventually, we can expose a UI that allow the user to do that. So it's the same sort of thing where for the MVC, we don't have to expose the ability for the end user to do that, but from an architecture and like how we build it, keeping that in the back of your mind would be helpful so that when we do get to wanting to do that, like, a year from now or however long, we don't have to go back and like rejigger a whole bunch of stuff. So hiding it from the user, but working towards that is the end goal. I think if that makes sense. Definitely not MVC though.
Did we get an answer to that one? Or is that, I think it would be great if when we have a decision throughout this process, just to bullet and bold the decision that we make, so we can summarize them after.
Is there a way to let the user click a button to migrate their epics to a specific, like if they want to migrate them over so that they know that it's happening? I guess that's like a user experience type thing.
We could do that. You could say migrate to epics v2. Make it be a choice, and then they could run in parallel.
That's going to be hard because basically, like we have a commitment not to make breaking changes to the REST API, for example.
What
So
if we
that would
did a
have to-
greenfield object instead, like
Yeah, but
an initiative that wouldn't touch the
it's the
current
same.
ones?
It's the same problem though, because if the user, the API will have to be changed to, say, for example, the epics endpoints will have to be changed in the REST API in order to retain their functionality to look in the issues table for an issue of type epic instead of looking in the epics table for rows of epics. And that could be quite a substantial update because it doesn't just need to look there, but it needs to use filters differently and so on. If a user was to enable a migration, we'd need the API would also need to know which table it's looking into, use different set of logic. So
yeah, you are right. On the other side, I would expect that for epics, we would use the same approach we are currently doing for requirements. The idea is to just, when we migrate requirements, we keep requirements table, but in requirements table, we keep just the requirement ID and the reference to the new issue object in issue table. Yeah, so we basically would have to first update epics related queries to use these both support epic objects in epics table, but join them with the already migrated epics to issue table. Yeah, and we will have to do this anyway to avoid breakage of our API. Because we will need to keep support API for half of the year. But I think that this is the most feasible way how to migrate epics. And I suppose we should be able to migrate this by clicking the button instead of scheduling the background migration as we plan to do with requirements. On the other side, downside is that then we don't have migration under our own control, and it will be longer action to do it. And just a small reminder, all epics migration is blocked by converting or consolidating project and groups, but I'm sure everyone is aware of this, so I will not dive again into this problem.
Along those lines, Michelle Gill is the engineering DRI for moving that forward, and I think the access group was going to work on stuff. But if that is a dependency of moving forward with this, then I think it would be great for our EMs and engineers to talk to her and be like, hey, we need to work on this, at least getting issues, at the group level. How can we contribute to the consolidation work so that we can achieve that, so that we can unblock ourselves here as well. I think there are ways to work around not having issues at the group level and still move forward with this, but I'm also okay to spend some time doing that because it sort of unblocks a lot of things too, with like requirements at the group level and all that other stuff. So.
Just had a follow up to what Jan said quickly. Could we phase it? This was out of order now. Could we start with a button and then move bring everyone over at a certain point?
Yeah,
like a feature flag.
That would be possible too. I don't see a big problem in either way. Supposing we choose the way I described, I think both options are possible. I think much bigger problem is the project group consolidation or the alternative path to support issues on groups level. So I think that it will take at least the half of the year to get to the phase we are able to migrate epics or start migrating these epics. So just to get a better idea about time schedule.
I had some concerns about the benefit of having that button, for the extra work that it would require, given that the user already has to take an instance administrator already has to take an action to upgrade to the latest version of GitLab. What benefit adding also a button to decide when they want to migrate this by specific part of GitLab, what benefit it adds, but I'm open to suggestion on that. Like, we're nearly, I think we're out of time. What I'm going to do with the backend topics that we didn't get to is just put them into an issue and treat it as a retrospective of our move of requirements to issue types. We won't solve all of these, as Mark pointed out yesterday. We don't actually have a requirement page, so we won't run into the problem with IID collisions because we, in URLs. So we won't solve everything, like, but I think, like, rather than lose the information, I'll put them in an issue, and we can kind of, as we figure things out for requirements, we can sort of answer some of those questions.
I'd like to propose as well that we use next week's time, this same time with our group sync, our stage sync, to see if there are agenda items we should talk about on that next call. So we could transport these over into that agenda. I think these are important questions.
One thing to solve that IID problem, we didn't get to it, it's further below, but there's an open issue for properly handle moving issues, because right now we just close an issue and create a new one, basically. But if we properly handle it and handle the redirects, I think that same solution could work here for redirecting from an old Epic URL to a new issue type ID, if that makes sense. So I linked it down there somewhere towards the bottom, if we want to consider that, because we need to solve that anyways for issues and epics. Anything that you can move or close, basically it's a bad experience, because we basically are duplicating the data instead of moving it. So
yeah, but right, that raises then a whole bunch of other questions. Like, if I promote an issue to an epic, the issue has an IID, which I believe is scoped to the project level. The epic it's promoted to has an IID that I believe is scoped to the group level or subgroup. So somebody can correct me on that. Like, but again, it's two different ID spaces or pools of IDs, if you like. So there's a possibility of collision, and then the question arises, like, what do we do about this? Like, and so I think, like, thinking higher level about IDs specifically, and giving them like a global context as part of this work, like, makes a lot of sense, because we won't run into this in future.
makes sense. I think that's how Asana handles it with their issues.
Yeah, I suspect they would have to either switch to IDs or just strictly use combination of the project or group path with EID to reference these objects.
Okay, it looks like we're at time. So we'll transport what's left into issues or next week's meeting agenda. Thanks everyone for your participation. It's really exciting to kick this work off and to see what we'll accomplish over the next 6 months. This is a big thing, so I hope everyone is on board and excited for what this can mean for plan at GitLab.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Have a great
Bye,
day.
everyone. Have a great day.